Hey, welcome to week 2 of Western Civilization, History 101. So last week we talked about that kind of irony, about the fact that the history of the West actually has its origin in the East, in Southeast Asia. So during Chapter 1, Chapter 2, we're not in Europe, we're not in the Americas, we are in Southeast Asia, or what many people call today the Middle East. So we'll stick through that this week, and then next week we will move over to Europe, into Italy for the Roman Empire and Greece for the Greek Empire. So one of the reasons why we trace the origins of the West to the East is because of the Indo-European languages and Indo-European peoples. If you flip over to page 41, you'll see there is a section that discusses these languages and these peoples, and there's a map over on page 40 which provides some information about these peoples. So the book talks about a philologist, 18th century philologist, individual who studied languages, who was comparing languages such as early Germanic, Celtic, and Persian languages, and discovered all sorts of similarities between the three. And later philologists found other similarities with other sorts of languages, and the decision was that all of these languages must have come from a single origin, maybe some kind of a ancestral language that then fragmented over time. And so this language was called Indo-European, and the peoples who spoke that language and related languages, Indo-European peoples. So if you look on that page 40, you'll see some arrows which show the movement of those Indo-European language speakers. And note that there is a arrow that takes you just a little bit east of the Black Sea, right, if you can find that on the map. And that is present-day Armenia, Georgia, and it's also home to the Caucasus Mountains. So you probably heard the word Caucasian before. History scholars many centuries ago decided that they could split humans into 3 groups: Caucasoids, Mongoloids, and Negroids. So white Europeans, black Africans, and brown Asians. So the source for that Caucasian is the Caucasus Mountains. The idea is that the origin of white Europeans, right, comes through the Indo-Europeans who passed through the Caucasus Mountains. So this chapter is called Peoples, Gods, and Empires. So I just spoke a little bit about peoples. Gods is the next kind of topic. And when you think about gods, you might think of kind of 2 related issues. One is what kind of god you can have. And the second kind of issue is what's going to be the relation of religious power to secular power. So the Middle East has, for most of its history, the vast majority of its history, been polytheistic. So the peoples who lived in that area, they did not worship a single god, but worshipped many gods. And it's not really until the 2nd millennium BCE, approximately the 18th century, when an individual by the name of Abraham arises and makes contact with the Hebrew god Yahweh. Abraham, the kind of founder of Judaism, but also Muslims and Christians trace their lineage back to Abraham as well too. But even though Abraham is seen as kind of the first monotheist, as the book points out, it really is more than 1,000 years before the Jewish people, Israelites, Hebrews, embrace and consolidate around a single God, Yahweh. And you might think that that consolidation might happen during a peaceful time, a time when people can reflect, but that actually isn't the case. It's in the 6th century BCE when the Babylonian Empire conquers that area, Canaan, Jerusalem, the two kingdoms of Israel and Judah, and the Jewish people are dispersed. And it's only during that dispersal, or what scholars call a diaspora, and what your book calls the Babylonian captivity, it's a 50-year period in which the Jewish people are no longer centered in Jerusalem. It's during that period in which these individuals consolidate around a single, what the book calls, cult, and as the cult around Yahweh. So it's in the 6th century BCE when the Hebrews can really claim that they are a monotheistic religion, all right, worshiping a single God. And your book has a name for that, and it's monolatry, so worship of one God. All right. The book also talks about Zoroastrianism. Just get a short little bit about that. That too is a monotheistic religion, comes in the 1st millennium. But even though Hebrews, Zoroastrians are monotheistic peoples, they really represent a very small, two small populations in the Middle East. That's really not going to be until the 7th century CE, so 1400 years ago, in which the Middle East is really going to embrace monotheism in the form of Islam. Your book also takes up this idea of what's going to be the relationship between secular power and religious power. And kind of two contrasting types of power would be the Egyptian pharaohs. And pharaohs embraced a kind of fused identity where they embraced both religious power and secular power. And you might imagine that even though it is a very powerful position, religious power can be kind of a tricky sort of power to have. And when you are claiming to have some kind of power or regular conversation with the gods, right? Well, what if things don't go your way? You can imagine that some people might question your authority or power. So there are other individuals, other secular powers, who decide not to fuse both powers into one individual. King Sargon of Akkad is a great example of that. And he decides to just take secular power, but he's smart and he keeps religious power close to him, and he names his daughter as the high priestess. So it's far enough away that, if troubles come, no one can blame him for not being able to control the flood, to tell the great gods to, keep back the floods. It's his daughter, the priestess, who is now going to have that kind of control. So peoples, gods, and now empires. The book takes you through a variety of 2nd millennium and 1st millennium empires: Egyptian Empire, Neo-Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian, and then in the next chapter we'll talk about the Greek Empire of Alexander the Great. And in your writing assignment this week, you'll be able to explore those various empires. One interesting little thing about this chapter, I'm sorry to say, but during this class we're not going to be covering very many female leaders, and that's because in antiquity female leaders were quite the rarity. But interestingly enough, during the Egyptian dynasties, it was, I wouldn't say it was common, but every once in a while there was a female pharaoh, an individual who actually ruled an Egyptian dynasty. And so this chapter talks about one of those individuals, and her name is Hatshepsut, and you'll find a little discussion of her that begins on page 43, and then after that 2 pages called Interpreting Visual Evidence, which gives you some more information about Hatshepsut. So just kind of a little interesting kind of highlight tidbit historical information about Hatshepsut, an unusual female leader during the classical era. Let's see, one last thing to talk about. If you flip over to page 59, I'm going to do that. You'll see that map of the Hebrew kingdoms. Certainly if you pay attention to the news, you know that the Middle East, Jerusalem, that whole area, quite a bit of conflict over there. Political conflict, but also religious conflict. Both Christians, or I should say Christians, Jews, and Muslims believe that Jerusalem has a lot of religious significance, and so there's a lot of conflict over who's going to run the various temples, Jerusalem, who has access to it, etc. And of course, in Jewish history, there's the idea that God promised to Abraham the land of Canaan. The land of Canaan is considered to be Israel today. So there a lot of religious conflict in this area over geography. And so a word that you might come across every once in a while is Levant, L-E-V-A-N-T. It's a French word meaning rising. And so many scholars, instead of using kind of loaded language such as the land of Canaan, or maybe even Israel or Philistine, they have chosen this more neutral word, Levant, right, to identify this area that has so much religious conflict. As I said, the word means rising, and if you were on a boat in the Mediterranean Sea at dawn and you saw the sun rise, well, it would rise over Kingdom of Israel, Kingdom of Judah, Philistia, over that area. Hence that idea of rising the Levant. So, this week's assignments. So last week was a discussion week, which means you had your quiz, and then you had discussion boards to do. This week is a research week. Excuse me. So what that means is you're going to have your quiz, but you're not going to have discussion boards. You have a written assignment. And so that will be due on Friday. Quiz is due on Thursday. Written assignment is due on Friday. So this is basically the two kind of weeks that we'll have. The discussion week, like week 1, and then research week, like week 2. If you have any questions, you know where to reach me. Otherwise, have a great week.